With this Blues Riffs for Beginners video, we'll show you how to apply bending and vibrato technique to several classic blues riffs, along with guitar tabs and practice rhythm tracks. We'll cover it all with the step-by-step approach. Every riff in this lesson will be introduced in the key of A blues, so before we continue, it's a good idea to have a foundation first of some blues soloing basics, most notably the A blues box pattern along the 5th fret. We've covered this in previous blues lessons, so if you've never played this box pattern before, you might want to check out my blues guitar lessons playlist and fine-tune a little bit, get that good foundation down before we continue. But if you can play the A blues box pattern like I just did, we're ready now to continue with some bending and vibrato riffs. For our introduction to bending technique, we'll start with the most often used or most popular bent note I would consider in all of rock and blues. And you may ask yourself, what string, what fret, what key is it in? It's going to be an A blues, and it's going to be bending the 3rd string on the 7th fret. Again, we're going to be within this box pattern. The key to bending, we're going to start with a full bend. And the key to most bends is going to be to use multiple fingers on the strings. So we're going to bend the 3rd string, 7th fret, and we'll have our 3rd finger placed there. But we're also going to put down some support fingers. The 1 and 2 fingers go down, and you don't have to worry about spacing them out because the only note that we control the pitch with will be that 3rd finger. The 1 and 2 fingers, again, are support fingers, and you can sort of just scrunch them in there. You don't want to space them out. If you have your fingers sort of tucked in there together, it gives you more control over the bend. And for a 3rd string bend, we're going to do a riff, but we'll start with the bend as the first step. You just push it up. And the key is on this bend, we're focusing on a full bend. A full bend is when you bend the note up to where it matches the pitch of the note 1 whole step, or on guitar 2 frets higher than the note you're bending. So that pitch should match that note 2 frets higher. And if you're doing it on electric, it should be not too challenging. For those of you on acoustic guitar, it might wear out your fingers a little bit. But again, the objective with a full bend is to bend up a whole step. And now we're going to apply this to a riff. And I've covered this riff in some of the previous lessons, but we'll introduce it here for bending technique. It's a riff I refer to as the blues riff. And this riff has been around since blues started. You'll hear variations of it in all types of classic blues rock solos and riffs. And what the blues riff is, it starts with the bend, and then we're going to do this. And so step 1 we've already covered with the blues riff. There are only 3 steps we need to do to play the whole riff. Step 1 is a solid bend. Step 2, again playing within that A pentatonic minor box pattern, we just flatten that 1st finger along the 5th fret on the top 2 strings. And that is step 2. So going back, step 1, solid bend. Step 2, play the top 2 strings. Step 3, descend down the pentatonic minor box pattern. So after that top string, by descending down, that means we're going to go down to the 2nd string with the pinky finger and walk down that box pattern. And then we're going to land on the root note. Again, we've covered root notes also with previous lessons on that blues playlist, but we're landing on the root note, which is A. And we play this last note twice. On that final time we play it, we add vibrato technique. And vibrato is different than bending. With vibrato, you're really not changing the pitch of the note. You're slightly varying it a little bit. But again, you want to use multiple fingers. This time you only need 2 fingers, your middle and your 3rd finger. But the key to bending is you still want the note to sustain. So if you're a beginner, sustaining the note is the priority number 1. And then if you can get that vibrato technique while it's sustaining, if you've never tried vibrato before, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. A lot of beginners tend to over compensate, and they almost sort of bend. I call it like a slinky effect. You don't really want that. It's very subtle, but it sounds really cool, especially when combined with bending technique. So let's put together the complete riff. Again, we're applying both bending and vibrato. Here we go. And we'll do it again. From this A root note, we'll go to our next blues riff, which will be another bending technique we're going to introduce. It's called the bend and release technique. And the riff I call the bend and release riff. And starting from that first note, we're going to walk up that box pattern. And we're going to bend that 3rd string 7th fret again. But this time we're going to sustain the bend and release it back to the 7th fret. Here's what I mean. So again, you got to keep that pressure down with the fingers, otherwise you won't get sustain. And then we go back, kind of descend back down that box pattern to the initial note we started with. And this time, immediate vibrato, compared to the first riff where we went dun dun. This time it's just hit that vibrato right off the bat. Let's put together the complete bend and release riff. Again, it has bend and release technique, so that's hence the name. We'll do that one more time. Now, a good idea is to combine the two riffs we've learned so far, sort of put them together, and also then we'll work out playing the riffs along with some backing rhythms. So let's work on connecting the blues riff with the bend and release riff. Again, if you can visualize that box pattern, that will help with this because everything is within that A blues box pattern. So here we go with the blues riff. Then, same note begins the bend and release riff. And let's connect the riffs one more time. Next, we'll practice playing these riffs along with a backing rhythm track in A blues. And to make things a little more interesting, since we're going to repeat the combined riff, we're going to play it twice. In between, we're going to do a run going up and down the A blues box pattern. It'll just make the jam a little more interesting, a little more variety to it. Make sure to let that root note ring or sustain. Same with that last root note. So the running order of riffs will be the combined riff, and then going up and down the box pattern. For beginners, the challenge here is to not slip out of key, to kind of keep visualizing and stay within that A blues box pattern. So after we end on that root note, we'll repeat the combined riff again. And also with the rhythm track, there will be a guide solo because timing is also key to working on these riffs. So you want to follow along with the guide solo. You don't want to play ahead of it, and you don't want to fall behind it either. And if you can keep up with the guide track in the next clip, we'll be ready to show you some additional riffs after that. Now up to this point, both riffs we've covered featured bends only on the third string. We're now going to show you how to apply bending technique to the top two strings, the first and second string. And again, we're staying in A blues, so what we're going to do is talk about bending up on the 8th fret. So let's set ourselves up by playing the box pattern. And the question I want to present to you, of course we're going to show you, but how would you bend that note on the 8th fret? If you want, you can pause the video, but what would be the best way to apply bending technique to this note in A blues? Okay, the answer would be to again use multiple fingers. So by this point you should be familiar enough with the box pattern that you can start pivoting outside the pattern. You don't have to keep your hand totally in position there. You pivot the fingers to allow for better bending technique. Again, multiple fingers gives you more control and better tone over the bend. And so the technique, I call it the Screamin' bend technique because now we're playing the thinner, higher sounding strings. So on that 5th string 8th fret, you want all 3 fingers. And again, we want a whole step bend, or going up 2 frets. You want it to match that D note. That's the D note on the 1st string 10th fret. Let's do that bend again. And now we're going to apply that bend to a riff, a Screamin' bend riff. It's going to again be in A, and we start 5/8. Again, if we normally fret that 8th fret, we can use the pinky fingers. So 5/8, and then we pivot the fingers and bend that 8th fret and release it. So let's do that again. And then, since we're already there with our 3rd finger, we play that note with the 3rd finger, fret it with the 3rd finger, and then we end on the 5th fret, top string. But we're going to sustain that note and add some vibrato. So here we go with another vibrato technique. I simply call it 1 finger vibrato. Now, of course, you want to use multiple fingers on maybe the thicker lower strings, but as your fingers get stronger, and this time we can keep our fretting end steady in position. A 1 finger vibrato works fine on the top string, but there is a different technique. It's not really using your fingers as much as even your wrist or your forearm for this. So you just listen to anything by B.B. King. He is the guy who really introduced this, or really made it famous, that 1 finger vibrato technique. So we're going to apply this 1 finger vibrato with the Screamin' bend into a riff. I call it the Screamin' bend riff, and it's 5/8, bend and release on the 8th fret. Back down to the 8th fret, pluck it normal, and then 1 finger vibrato. And let's do that again. Once you're able to do that, you can do the same thing on the 2nd string. Remember, in that A blues box pattern, it's 5/8, 5/8 on both the 1st and the 2nd string. So the exact same riff. Maybe one more. And last but not least, we'll put the 2 together. One Screamin' bend riff on the 1st string, and we'll follow it with 1 on the 2nd string. The next clip we'll practice both Screamin' bend riffs along with a backing rhythm in A, but we're also going to practice combining these riffs with the riffs we've already covered. So a bunch of challenges with the next clip. First things first, we'll set a running order to follow along with the guide solo track. And the running order, we'll run through it right now, slow walkthrough. We'll start with going up the box pattern, ascending up the box pattern. And that's going to set us up for the Screamin' bend riff on the top string that'll follow. And then we'll connect that to the blues riff. Then we'll descend down the box pattern. And then we'll go to the Screamin' Bend riff on the second string. And then we'll end everything with the bend and release riff. So we'll keep this running order of riffs on the screen so you have a guide to follow, and not only that, you'll also have the guide solo to play along with as well. Again, try not to play ahead or behind the solo. The focus is not only to play the riffs correct, but also help develop a sense of proper timing as well by keeping up, staying even with the guide solo track. Well, now that we know how to do a couple of screaming bend riffs, let's do some howling bend riffs next. And technically, we would call these unison bends. And again, we're going to start with A blues. And how we get that sort of howling effect, we're going to strum two strings at the same time. And in this case, it'll be the third and the second strings in A blues. But we're going to bend that third string, 7th fret, just like we did previously, up a whole step. But at the same time, we're going to strum that second string. But we're not going to change the pitch of that note. So in other words, when we bend up that third string 7th fret, we're bending up to match the pitch of the adjacent string, hence the howling effect. And technically we're bending up to an E note. The third string 7th fret is D, D, D sharp, E. So when we bend up to E, we match the pitch of the second string 5th fret, which is E. And that's a unison bend. And what we're going to do on this one is we're going to sort of sustain the bend. We're going to play it 3 times and sort of sustain it and then release the bend down and add some vibrato at the end of it. It's going to sound like this. It's a little bit tricky to do, but to maintain that a little bit, even if you just get some sustain, but if you have some vibrato on that release, it sounds pretty cool in the mix, especially when harmonizing with some rhythm guitar. And then just try to keep some sustain going on that third string. One more time with this howlin' bend riff. And again, we're going to combine that with some of the other riffs we covered in a second. But let's do another howlin' bend riff. But this one will involve the top 2 strings. So what we're going to do now is we're going to anchor our first finger on the top string 5th fret. And we're going to bend the second string 8th fret. So we have to extend those fingers a little bit more. Here's how this unison bend will sound. Again, we're going to try and get some sustain on the release. And we'll do that one more time. So what we'll do next is combine these riffs with some of the previous riffs we've covered with a backing rhythm track. And again, it's a good idea to map out the running order before we play along with that track. And the running order for this next clip, we'll start with the blues riff, then going up the box pattern. We'll do those 2 within the first 4 bars. Then we'll do that screaming bend on the second string. And then descend down the box pattern. And then as the progression resolves, we'll throw in the new riffs. We'll start with that unison bend with the second and third strings, and we're going to connect that to the bend and release riff. It's going to sound like this. And then we'll go to the next howling riff on the top two strings. And we'll connect that to the Screamin' bend riff on the top string. And then we should end with that vibrato on the root note just about at the end of the progression. So again, we'll have the running order up on the screen, and see if you can keep up with that running order with the next clip. Now, all the riffs we've covered so far in this lesson have been in the key of A, but now that we have a foundation down, we can start shifting around and playing these riffs along different fret positions or keys, because both the box pattern and all the riffs within the box pattern are movable. So next we're going to shift up to the key of C blues, where everything will be along the 8th fret. We're going to play the same running order, but it will be a little bit of a challenge because now you're in a different fret position. Frets get closer together, so you have to concentrate more to get clarity. But in addition to that, we'll also play a different blues rhythm in C. We'll sort of do a funk style rhythm, because these blues riffs are versatile. They can be played over various styles of music. So we're going to change up the rhythm, change up the key, same running order. And in fact, let's rehearse that running order before we play along with that next clip. So starting with the blues riff in C, going up the box pattern, Screamin' riff on the second string, then descend down the box pattern, and the howlin' riff with the second and third strings, connected to the bend and release riff. And we've got that howlin' riff on the top two strings. And then the Screamin' bend on the first string to end the progression. Again, we're in C along the 8th fret. And finally, what we're going to do is have you play along with a backing rhythm track without a guide solo. That's going to give you the opportunity to mix and match these running order riffs in any order that you want. And when you look at all the potential riffs we have, and you think of all the combinations you could play with those riffs, there's thousands of variations you can now play. So with the next track, we will extend it a bit. It'll be 24 bars, 2 full verses, 2 12-bar progressions. And this time we're going to change the key up to the key of D flat blues. So we'll be playing along the 9th fret position. And again, this will give you the chance to sort of try out, experiment different combinations on your own, see what floats your boat or sounds good to you. And again, we'll be in D flat, and you'll have all the riffs on the screen as a reference to try out.
you.